Good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt will be with us at 5:30. He's got some more information on what's going on behind the scenes right now. A big debate in the Senate over just how many illegals to let into the country. Sounds like the wrong debate to be having. Eric Schmitt thinks so, too. We'll talk to him. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A lot of conversation through the years about January 6, 2021. It's become a high holy day for the Democrat Party, who think that they can generate long-term power out of it. And they talk extensively about what they refer to as an insurrection, but they don't talk very much, if at all, about the existence of two apparent pipe bombs left outside of the respective party headquarters on the evening of January 5th, and then discovered nearly 17 hours later during the day on January 6th while Kamala Harris was inside of the DNC, the vice president-elect who has Secret Service protection, whose Secret Service should have swept the area for suspicious packages well before her arrival. It's led to a lot more questions than answers. In fact, we don't even have a suspect in custody. The FBI claims they're still looking for him. For more on this, I want to bring in a guest who's following the details really closely, including all of the newest things that we're learning. Kyle Seraphin is here. He's a former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast on Rumble as well. Kyle, always good to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Vince. Good to talk to you as well.
I'm following with some interest, a lot of interest, the reporting of both Darren Beatty as well as the findings of Congressman Thomas Massie, who was on the House Judiciary Committee, and he's been sharing some of his transcribed interview with a man called Stephen D'Antuono. Am I saying that? How do you say his last name?
D'Antuono.
D'Antuono. Yep. I should probably know how to say that. It sounds Italian. Former FBI assistant director in charge of the D.C. field office. And what strikes me about the conversation that these two men had in June of last year is that this important FBI official seems to know almost nothing about the pipe bomb saga. And if I was in his position, wouldn't you know like literally everything about that? It seems like one of the most important cases in his entire career.
You would think that. I think there's something about the FBI senior executives that they love not knowing anything because it gives them that plausible deniability. It seems like a terrible way to run any organization. It's not the way you'd want to run military or law enforcement ops. But there is sort of an insulation if you're plausibly deniable, if you walk in and say, oh, I don't know. But let me put a finer point to that, which I actually found on Twitter. I had a Twitter follower point this out of all places. And he said, why is it that Steve D'Antuono knows what Kyle Seraphin is saying in the media about this, but doesn't know what his own agents are investigating?
Good question.
That actually might be the single most damning thing that I've read, at least in the last 48 hours.
Yeah, so a couple of things stand out to me from this past week about those pipe bombs. One of them is I saw people were making comparisons that the bombs that were found, again, we're referring to them as bombs. They look like bombs that were found. Yep. It consisted of metal pipes with end caps on them and a kitchen timer that only runs for an hour. It was discovered 17 hours later. So one, that tells you quite a bit about the likeliness that it would explode if it doesn't even have a timer that would go that long. And two, that these devices look, is this right, exactly like the devices that are used in FBI bomb training?
It's kind of generalized IED or improvised explosive device training that people see, whether you're in the military or you're in law enforcement. A lot of people use this type of sort of basic, pipe bomb construction to either train dogs or to train people to look at them. People see very similar things like that going through basic training in the military because that's always been a big threat overseas, people being able to, improvise types of explosives. So, yeah, I mean, it looks a lot like whether they be FBI or anyone else. They look a lot like training materials to which I recall at the time, because my surveillance team out of D.C. was actually assigned to go and find the so-called pipe bomber. And the first thing you want to know is, were the pipe bombs viable? Were they potentially explosive? Because that changes the way that you're going to follow the subject. That's an officer safety issue that we asked right up front. And the kind of unofficial word that we had at the time was looked very bomb-like. And I think you've accurately described it, pipe bomb with wires and going into an end cap and all that. But look very bomb-like is very different than actual explosive device.
Yes.
And then some of the stuff we're seeing Darren reveal, and also we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Steve Baker, who's been reviewing tons and tons of this footage. It's pretty obvious that they actually were very bomb-like. They didn't actually have explosives. They didn't blow up. And when they detonated them in place, that wasn't the case.
So help me understand how these things were found in the first place. They were spotted, we now know, by a plainclothes Capitol Police officer who ended up walking over to a Metropolitan Police vehicle, speaking to the men inside the cruiser, and then going over next to the Secret Service vehicle that was sitting next to them because they were at the DNC headquarters, parked outside because of Kamala Harris. And then everyone very slowly eventually gets out of the car. They don't look like they're in any rush whatsoever. And then one of the officers takes a picture of, is it the device or is it inside of a bag? What was the position of this thing?
Yeah, it was a picture of the device, and that's the famous picture that people are familiar with seeing on social media and in a lot of media coverage. It's the actual, pipe bomb with, they can actually see the end cap. They can see some of the wires. They can see the timer.
Wait, does any of that make sense to you? A metal pole with a timer attached to it was sitting under a bench for 16 hours and not a single person ever raised it until one plainclothes officer did?
I mean, you've been around Washington, D.C. I've been around it a lot on foot as well, and that's not something that would not raise some alarms. And then you kind of just look at, imagine your training and experience as a law enforcement officer, and they've already had notification over the radio that there was another bomb found, right, over at the RNC. So you're already on bomb alert, if you will. You walk by, you see something, and then you're going to slowly meander over to a couple of friendlies who have a protectee who just happens to be the vice president-elect inside the building, and then you're going to just chat with them, and that guy's going to finish his sandwich before he gets out. He's going to let kids walk within 15 or 20 feet of this, unknown, potentially explosive device. None of it makes any sense.
Okay.
None of it looks like the way that you would respond to a potential explosive device.
Okay, here's another big piece of the investigation. Massey, speaking to Stephen D'Antuono, asks him about whether or not there are cell phone records, because in the video footage of this guy, apparently he uses his phone, which is about as clear as indication of any that that's a good way to actually begin looking into who this is. Geofence the area, check the times, and then pull whoever used a phone at the time. Stephen D'Antuono says, yeah, we weren't able to get that phone data because it was corrupted. And then he goes on to say, don't worry, it's not a conspiracy or anything. Sometimes this happens, but the data was corrupted from that cell phone provider. Does that strike you as normal?
It strikes me as a reasonable explanation right up until you figure out that they were able to geofence everybody that was moving around the building on January 6th. And they had no problem identifying all the subjects and 1,200 plus arrests and some convictions and all that. So that seems problematic when you throw it in the face of what else they were able to achieve. It just so happens that the single most terroristic act on a day that will forever live in infamy and dwells in the hearts and mind, the Holy Feast Day, as you mentioned, for the Democrats, that single individual who was probably the single most dangerous person to the folks who live in the National Capital Region. Like, nobody wants a bomber to be running around and leaving indiscriminate pipe bombs that could kill important people or regular people or any people.
Yes.
And could damage the buildings in there. I mean, it's the scariest thing that you could have. And why is that not where the entire squad that handles the January 6th investigation puts all their effort?
It reminds me of the Jeffrey Epstein saga, where conveniently every available surveillance device was down, so we'll never actually be able to see what really happened. And everyone was falsifying the records of their rounds. It's all deeply convenient for not getting to the bottom of something that seems pretty pressing.
So you can't say that that's conclusive. People will go, well, that's proof that something happened. No, it's
right.
Actually the opposite of it. But it's incredibly troubling. And either we have this very, very convenient and inconvenient for people who want the truth scenario where all this important records are not retrievable, or something deeper is going on. Both are possible.
Yes.
We have to leave our mind open to it. But when you have a lot of these things start stacking up, and we already have this massive distrust that has been built up in the last probably 4 or 5 years against all the institutions that used to be able to say, just trust us.
Yep.
And we would. We don't do that anymore. And so now there's nothing there for us to back it up. So it leads people to think the worst.
Now, let me go to the opposite side of this for just a moment, because in all of these things, I do want to think through all of the possible scenarios. So I will now what they refer to as steel man the case a little bit, which is that the guys who are sitting in a police cruiser who don't seem to respond with any quickness to the apparent bomb, My guess is that if there was a conspiracy of some kind, that they wouldn't be in on it. Like if you were planning a conspiracy like this, you wouldn't tell every rank and file cop that it's a fake bomb. You would try to probably keep that to a smaller group of people than to just tell everybody. So my impression is I don't actually know why they were meandering, but my impression is that they weren't told in advance that's a fake bomb.
Well, then you have to wonder why they took so long to set up a safety perimeter, which they didn't really do.
Yeah.
Why it took so long to get people evacuated out of the area. You've got to protect the high-value, target inside the building. So why was she not secured and moved immediately? And the other problem is they did it the right way over at the RNC. They did it the wrong way at the DNC. So did they have the information that the bombs looked bomb-like but inert?
Yeah.
And how would you know that? I mean, you couldn't operate that way. I don't know what the minimum safe is for a bomb that size, but my recollection is something like 300 feet would be the minimum you'd start. So the fact that they weren't shutting down blocks away and keeping little kids from walking, even if it is have a timer that's only set for an hour and, theoretically goes up, you don't know when it was put there,
right.
Number one, if you're just observing it. And number two, you don't know how stable or, unstable the device is, whether or not it's got a short and maybe a stiff breeze blows it and suddenly your electrical connection goes and now it's going to go off. So all of the possibilities exist that you would have to treat it as real until proven otherwise, which is what you would do. That's why they actually brought in a robot and some of the other stuff. We're going to see a lot more of this develop because this footage has been obtained by the Blaze. So
right.
People should kind of hold on to their hats. I think a lot of this narrative from January 6th is about to get blown up, not to mix metaphors.
I hope we get the answers here. So Kyle Seraphin, is it your view, having been so close to this, were these bombs operable? Meaning, were they actually in any way a threat to people? Because Stephen D'Antuono seemed to be confused about that. Again, you would think he would know, but as he sat before Congress, he said he had no idea.
Well, you would think that he would know. We were told that they weren't. I guess he was told something different. I think that the confusion is, and this is another one of those things, when you keep your executives kind of in the dark, then they can make these plausibly deniable claims. The word viability actually is the place that we kind of have to hinge on in his statement in the deposition that Thomas Massie released. And what that means to an FBI senior executive and assistant director in charge and what it means to normal people might be very different. I'm guessing that's the case. I don't have that conclusively, but if I had to bet, they're going to say that because it had an initiation device, it had wires, it had a power source, it had a casing, and there was some amount of explosive material or, residue, that makes it, quote unquote, viable in the same way that your minivan, it's a viable mode of transportation, even if it only has 6 ounces of gas and it can't get you down the road. It's viable, it just doesn't actually work. That might be kind of the way that they hinge on it. I'm guessing there's some kind of trickery being played because they love to play games with language. So
yes.
They're never technically lying, but they're never telling us the truth, and that's kind of gross.
So to make sure I understand, you were involved in investigating this at the outset, trying to track who dropped those bombs in those locations, correct?
Yeah, there were a bunch of people that were involved from Washington Field. My little piece of the pie was that I worked on a surveillance team in the area, and we were tasked with running down a person of interest who was given us as a pretty credible lead that we were going to do what's called pattern of life. So watch the front door, find out comings and goings, and so on and so forth. And that individual I've never seen pop back up again. There's some investigative reporters that have kind of dug into it, and they've come up with nothing particularly interesting. Whether that was a mistake, whether somebody did some bad investigations and gave us bad intel, always possible.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter was our team got pulled off that. We got put on January 6th leads that came in from like Facebook and other people that were just reporting their neighbors because they didn't like them for being Republicans. And we never touched that again. And I've talked to my buddies that were still on the team. They've never been recast onto the Pipebomb case since that first week or so after January 6th.
Who took the Pipebomb
really
case?
Strange.
Do you know who took over the Pipebomb case?
Well, not to get too conspiratorial about it because this will get people really strange, but the initial group that actually inherited that case at Washington Field was a group called CI-14, Counterintelligence 14, who incidentally also were the ones responsible for the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. I don't know if that's just coincidence or if they were just overloaded with January 6th stuff, but that seems really strange. And more importantly, they were a counterintelligence group. They weren't a counterterrorism team, so they didn't do manhunts and they didn't do investigations into explosives. So all that seemed really weird at the time, but
yes.
It was it's kind of a wild time for those of us who were there.
But Stephen D'Antuono wasn't his prior job involved with coming up with the fake Fednapping of Gretchen Whitmer, that he manufactured a conspiracy to kidnap the sitting governor of Michigan to make it look like that Trump supporters were a grave threat to the country?
I'm nodding along with you. Yeah, to be fair with him, he was the special agent in charge of the Detroit field office, which had that investigation. Whether he wasn't the lead guy on it, obviously they would have had a case agent, much lower level. But in theory, the Bucks would stop with the top executive of that field office, and that was him. And then then he was recruited over, and suddenly now he finds himself, driving the train of the January 6th investigations.
Yes.
Quite interesting. All of it is. Like I said, you can't say that any of these things are conclusively true, but it does look weird. It doesn't feel good when you're on the outside looking into it.
No.
And I haven't felt any better about it over the last couple of years, being on the inside and the outside.
Finally, just a political question. This is just about Kamala Harris and what happened there. So Kamala Harris was in the DNC. They say eventually they evacuated her out in the midst of all of this. They took her out of the building. How come Kamala Harris, in your view, has never mentioned this? It was Darren Beatty who's raised this. I think it's a smart point. Kamala Harris, who would exploit literally a window being open and changing the temperature in the room and accuse it of racism, she has never once talked about this in public to her political advantage. She's never said, oh, they tried to kill me on January 6th. I almost died. There was a bomb near me. I mean, AOC would leap all over that talking point. Why hasn't Kamala Harris?
It's an ongoing question. I think we only have speculations. My buddy Dan Bongino thinks it's kind of the Plan B option that didn't materialize because people actually went into the White House, or into the Capitol rather.
Yeah.
So that was a possibility that could be exploited. The other question is how come this Capitol police officer who heroically spotted this bomb and brought it to everyone's attention has not been paraded out in front of us and given awards and things like that?
Amazing.
So that's also kind of suspect. My buddies and I kind of always look, whenever you're the guy who's the front man for heroic action, you'd expect at least a little bit of recognition, maybe a little trophy or something. And that never happened either. So we have far more questions. And like I said, this should have been the single biggest focus for Washington's field office. The WFO folks should have been handling this as the number one threat to the area, because an indiscriminate pipe bomber, that's scary to everybody. It doesn't matter about political party or anything else. Moms and strollers should be worried about that.
You're totally right. You're totally right. A Capitol police officer who saved the day, found the bombs, never even mentioned in public, never given honors for that. Meanwhile, Michael Byrd, who murders Ashley Babbitt, becomes a hero of the left. It is wild. Thank you very much for helping us try to make some sense of all of it. Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast. Good to talk to you today, sir. Coming up, Senator Eric Schmitt joins us from the great state of Missouri. We'll talk about the ongoing Senate negotiations with regard to our border. It's chaos right now in the Senate, and that honestly is a good thing. We'll get the reaction from the senator coming up. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 5:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Right now, Congress is debating just how many more illegals we should let into the country. Sounds like the wrong conversation to be having, doesn't it? A couple of U.S. senators step up to the microphone today to express their anger over all of this and hoping to stop it. Among them is my next guest, U.S. Senator Eric Schmitt from the state of Missouri, joins us now. Senator, nice to have you with us. Thank you very much for taking some time today.
Great to be with you again.
What is happening behind the scenes? We talk about fixing the border. What I'm hearing described today doesn't sound anything like stopping the flow of illegals.
Well, I mean, part of the frustration you're hearing is that there's a lot of these, so-called negotiations happening behind closed doors. Nobody's seen any of this language. And here's my perspective. Joe Biden right now could shut the border down if he wanted to,
right,
with the tools he has. He doesn't want to. I mean, on day one, remain in Mexico was a policy he reversed. When I was Attorney General, actually, we sued on that. When I was Attorney General of Missouri, we sued on it and kept it in place long enough. He still wouldn't do it. We had to get the court to tell him to do it, but it's not in their DNA. He changed that. He changed Title 42. He's abusing the parole process. What is that? It means that when people are coming here asking to come in, it's supposed to be an individual adjudication. He's releasing people because they come from a certain country or a certain category. That's illegal, and that accounts for millions of people who we don't even know where they're at. The border wall, which we had paid for, he was paying $140,000 a day to not build it, and then sold off, like one example, $4.4 million worth of materials for a little over $100,000. So the point is, they're not interested in securing the border. And so this idea that some language change here or there is going to have a come to Jesus moment with Joe Biden is ridiculous.
Right. And it's not just that they're ignoring the border. They're actively opening it up. I mean, Texas is saying we need border security. In fact, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, today issued a statement that under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution, that Texas has the constitutional authority to defend and protect itself, and as a result, will continue to do it. The Texas National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety and other Texas personnel are acting on that authority, he declares in this letter, again released today. Now, we're seeing some expression of that in Eagle Pass, Texas right now as they lock down at least 2.5 miles of border. But it's to the great consternation of the Biden administration because they desperately want to cut through these border barriers, Senator, to allow more people in. So they're not just ignoring the border, they're actively sabotaging it.
That's right. And that's what you need to know. So on one hand, there's some who are negotiating with the Biden administration because they're going to double pinky swear this time to secure the border. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, they're at the Supreme Court fighting Texas's ability to actually secure the border. That's why this thing is just it's based on a false premise that the person on the other side of the table actually is interested in securing the border. The truth of the matter is the Biden administration is captured by the left. They've got a bunch of gender study degree holding folks from Ivy League schools who've written white papers about open borders. They're global citizens who don't even believe in the sovereignty of our own border. Yet we're supposed to believe that they're going to be serious about it. And quite frankly, it's an attempt to unlock this Ukraine money. That's a sort of elephant in the room. But we should have these debates. But the truth is, we're not even talking about the things that might be given away to this administration, like normalizing 5,000 people a day coming here illegally. So until we see the language, there's going to, we're sort of guessing. But what we hear so far, it just sounds like a bad deal.
That's one of the things I've heard, that it supposedly involves establishing 5,000 illegal aliens entering our country every day, upwards of 1.8 million illegals a year by that math. Jay Johnson, former DHS secretary under Barack Obama, once described that 1,000 a day was a crisis. So what is this?
Yeah, it's sort of giving into this narrative. And the other thing that's true, and I think that's really important for your audience to understand, under current law, President Trump secured the border. Under current law that Joe Biden doesn't want to enforce, we have an open border. So when we don't, really need any new language when President Trump comes back into office for him to secure the border, he did it before. But again, this is a very elaborate exercise, I think, on some of the Ukraine dollars, but
yes.
then also, the negotiation with the Democrats on this are just very concerned about what language. And by the way, what no one's talking about yet is there could be language in there that actually inhibits President Trump's ability moving forward to control the border, because the Democrats are thinking about that too.
Oh, you're definitely right about that. So what can be done here, Senator? Obviously, Republicans in the minority in the Senate, but they do have the House right now. I think the big feeling among my audience is it's time for hardball. In fact, hardball should have been a long time ago, whether that means shutting down the government entirely to compel the closure of our border to illegal foreign nationals, or does it mean Texas really saying, you know what, I don't care what you say to me. We are going to secure this border. We have the constitutional right to do it. You want to send in the feds to fight us over it, go for it. What needs to be done here, Senator?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, nothing can come out of the Senate on this without 60 votes. And so ultimately here in the Senate, our ability to hold, the 41 Republican senators to not vote for a bad deal would be the first order of business. The second order of business is we've got to get back to, so you've heard a lot of this over the last year or so. I've been in the Senate for 13 months. I was elected, 2 Novembers ago in 2022.
So it's not all your fault, just to be clear. I just want.
Well, the irony is, I speak with some experience. When I was Attorney General of Missouri, we litigated against this administration on Title 42, Remain in Mexico border wall issues.
Right.
We really took the lead on it because we said every state's a border state. So I've seen this. I've seen the enemy,
yes.
And they're not interested, like I said. So I know what the motivation is. But the point is, in 13 months, we've spent 8 hours on appropriations bills. Chuck Schumer doesn't want to do it. One of the ways we can get at this, Vince, is if we had individual appropriation bills, right? So that it's not this false choice of you're either going to vote for this thing that you saw an hour ago that's a monstrosity omnibus, or you want to shut down the government. That's a false choice. We got to get back to a place where we have individual appropriation bills. That gives us additional leverage on something like this, border funding, right? So you can isolate these things. And it's what the people expect us to do. I don't think most people have any idea that we don't debate any of this stuff
Sure.
here in the Senate. It's just unveiled on high, like Moses coming down with the Ten Commandments.
Yes, but in the Senate, though, the unfortunate problem we have right now is Republicans don't control it. So that whole process is controlled by Democrats, and they have no interest in making this process more transparent and orderly. So for now, that's a wish list that you're describing. But maybe in the House there's a chance, but for some reason they keep moving into can-kicking mode every time it comes up to yet another time to consider the budget.
Yeah, and it's if we want to be the Reform Party, and I didn't, run for office to come up here and not tackle tough issues.
Sure.
If we want to be the Reform Party, when we get in the majority, we have a favorable map. These are things we should insist on. I mean, this is the kind of change that I think that people expect. Because, look, we ought to be accountable to the voters. They could actually know how you feel about something as opposed to all this stuff jumbled up into one big, monstrosity.
I heard audio of Senator Ted Cruz a little bit ago. I played it on the show here, lacing into Republican leadership. That would be, of course, Mitch McConnell and the people around him for going along with all of this. What is the feeling among Senate Republicans? Is there, I guess from the outside, it's hard to tell how many people are upset with Senate leadership and whether or not there's an actual and constructive revolt brewing.
Well, I can tell you, look, we had one of the things I didn't know when I ran for office. We have lunch together every day. I didn't know this. Senate Republicans, we have lunch together every day, and you get to know people, and we do try to hash out some of these things internally. And this week, and we had another conference meeting today. I joined like 15 other Republicans. Say we need to talk about these issues. Let's spend a couple of hours. We're not doing anything else. Let's sort of hash through these things. And there is a divide in our conference on these issues. And that, by the way, is probably normal in some ways, but we are the opposition party. And my point of view on this is, look, we ought to insist that Joe Biden actually do his job. We have laws on the books. The problem is you have an executive branch not interested in executing the law. And so that's the real issue. So, look, we're going to have these disagreements and, disagreements about strategy. But this road we're going on down right now is, my view is, let's side with House Republicans. Let's side with Speaker Johnson on some priorities as opposed to, cozying up to Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer all the time.
So the good news is this can actually be stopped. Another sellout of the country. It is possible right now to stop this.
Absolutely. And so, the next phase of all this is, now look, I think they ought to break all this stuff up and debate it individually. But if you're going to have all this stuff jumbled together, eventually they're going to have to unveil some language. And if you can believe it, we're actually having to debate to give us time to look at it. In these negotiations, we've been told it's so complicated, it's taken months, and every word affects another word, so they don't want to release it and all this. And okay, but if that's true, you can't just say, here it is, we're voting on it tomorrow. This should go through a committee. It should go through markups. We should be able to amend it. We should have weeks to review it, and somehow 3 weeks is controversial. I mean, again, this is the kind of stuff that when you lift the veil up is very concerning, even from a process perspective.
Let me, if I may, I want to tap into your legal expertise as well, having been the Attorney General of the state, about what this standoff between Texas and the federal government. Who is standing on firm constitutional ground here? You do have Greg Abbott claiming, look, the Constitution affords him the ability to thwart an invasion of his state. Is he right about that? And how far should he take this?
Well, part of the problem is the Supreme Court, they didn't have a written opinion about this. And so there's a lot of ambiguity about even particularly what arguments might be made, if it's a supremacy clause argument or, the government, the federal government's claiming they can't access the border to do their job because of the razor wire. I think that's a pretext to just cut down the razor wire, right? So ultimately, I think from a legal perspective, they're going to have these arguments on what's called on the merits, meaning all the evidence and all the arguments, as opposed to what the court decided on, which was a preliminary or temporary injunction. So this is going to play out in the courts. But in the meantime, I think the most telling thing here again is the Biden administration is really trying to push the envelope and actively make Texas's job to secure its border more difficult. Now, look. This should be the federal government. I mean, the federal government shouldn't do a lot of things it does. One of the things it should do is to secure the border. But now you've got this legal issue because you have an administration that doesn't want to do that. And so it is a big constitutional question.
Well, every time a government employee breaks open a barrier to allow more foreign nationals into our country, that should probably be a campaign video just to say Democrats shouldn't hold power, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't believe that this is actually what's happening. I mean, if you listen to like Bill Clinton's State of the Union speeches in the 90s, he was talking about border security, and somehow the Democrat Party has become, radicalized to the point where they don't believe in American exceptionalism and they don't think that our border should mean anything. And that's a disagreement that isn't like, what should the tax rate be? Or, this is a fundamental debate we're having right now about whether we're going to remain a country in the sense that no country in the history of the world has willingly opened up its border the way we're doing right now. It's unprecedented. No one does. Now, people have problems with, mass migration or something during wars and those sorts of things. But we're essentially have a sign up saying, come here, no questions asked. We'll get you on a plane. We'll sign you up for benefits. And you got a court date sometime in the 2030s. And that's not an exaggeration. And we hope you show up. So that's the situation we're in now. And it doesn't need to be, again, he can turn these folks away. He can make Mexico the waiting room. He can, not issue mass parole, make it individual adjudications. And guess what? The cartels who are running these people and, terrorizing people along the way with rape and torture and extortion, they're benefiting from all this. They get the message.
Yeah.
But if you normalize 5,000 a day, guess what? The cartels will respond to that. They respond to incentives, and that's not a direction we want to go in.
Just to be clear, you mentioned Bill Clinton. There's also one other famous Democrat who's advocated for fences and securing the border before. Take a listen. This is audio from 2006.
The reason why why I believe the fence is needed is not related to immigration as much as to drugs. I'm the guy that wrote the National Crime Bill. I'm the guy that wrote the National Drug Act. I'm the guy that wrote the law that set up a drug czar. But let me tell you something, folks. People are driving across that border with tons, hear me, tons of everything from byproducts from methamphetamine to cocaine to heroin. It's all coming up through corrupt Mexico.
That was Joe Biden asking for a wall in 2006. My, how things have changed. It's amazing.
It's unbelievable, actually, and it's not funny. It's tragic, but that feels like 1,000 years ago now, based on who this guy is.
It really, really does. Senator Eric Schmitt from Missouri. Thank you, sir. Please keep up the fight on behalf of the American people. Well, thanks to the Democrats who are in charge in the nation's capital, D.C. is becoming more hellish by the day. Unfortunately, a great city. A CVS store in Columbia Heights that has been plagued by robberies is now closing its doors after struggling with months of near constant crime that have left the shelves there empty. Fox 5 with the report. Here's some audio of a man who did some reporting of his own. He was inside the Columbia Heights Metro, then walked across the street to show viewers that all the stuff that was being stolen was being sold literally across the street by either the people who stole it or paid for it to be stolen.
They opened a new metro station here, and then they opened up a bunch of shopping areas around here. But what's happened, and this is, now we'll see it on the other side of the street, these street vendors have been paying kids to go to the CVS and steal stuff that they then resell on the street at a discounted price. So a lot of the stuff that's stolen from
That's brazen. You steal it and then sell it right outside?
CVS ends up over here on the streets being resold. Not all of them. Some of these are legit street vendors. Oh, this is some cool stuff, but some are selling weird stuff.
Yeah, and he points out, you can see some of the cosmetic products and things, soaps and lotions being sold right there on one of these folding tables. Just a few months ago, Fox 5 interviewed some of the residents in the area about what was going on, and they're dopes.
Stuck. I mean, it's bad to do. At the same time, they're probably doing it for a reason. They need those things, but they shouldn't just be going in and clearing the shelves because this isn't sustainable for the store.
A lot of folks actually can't afford any of the things in there. I'm not saying that stealing has to be the solution to that, right? However, I don't know, maybe if the city could provide more accessible resources to unhoused or under-income folks that can provide them hair care, bodily care, hygiene care, etc. That could be an option.
Yeah, so I'm assuming there are some residents there who don't think this is a good idea, but they're among the people who think that the worst thing you can be is judgmental of crime. That's crazy. And we've got to wake them up. What do they call it? Woke? It's 5:58. The great one, Mark Levin, up next here on WMAL.